Hey freaks, it's JJ, and as promised, today I'm going to be explaining the concept behind Mastodon's Crack the Skye. Before I get started though, I want to give a big thank you to all of my subscribers. Thank you guys so much. It's coming up on about a year now since I started my YouTube channel, and I've got some like 400 odd subscribers. Thank you all for subscribing, and thanks for all the positive comments and positive feedback that I get from y'all. Love talking about metal with you, and again, if you have any suggestions, throw those in the comments. I also want to give a big shout out to the Metal Mixtape. I believe they gave me a shout out on the radio station not too long ago. If you all live in Oregon, please go check out his radio station, and also let me know in the comments if you're a fellow Oregonian. I don't live in Oregon anymore, but I am actually an Oregon native. Also, check out his band Insanity's Reign. I will put a link in the description on where you can find his band. They are a melodic thrash metal band, and they're pretty awesome, so please go check them out if you like to. Alright, moving on to Crack the Skye. So, Crack the Skye is named after the drummer Brann Dailor's sister, who killed herself at the age of 14 when he was only 15. Her name was Skye, hence why Crack the Skye has an E at the end in the title. This album is dedicated to her and her memory. So this album has a lot to do with dealing with grief and healing and loss and everything like that. It's also about Brent Hines' brain trauma experience. He got beat up at the VMAs, and he was actually in a coma for a while. And then he came out of the coma, and he had like a lot of brain trauma issues, such as like vertigo for a really long time. Anyway, so this album really deals with loss and grief and healing especially. So jumping into track 1. The story revolves around a protagonist. The protagonist is not given a name, it's just the protagonist. Though I, however, like to think of the protagonist as Skye, even though they do refer to the protagonist as a he. I personally like to refer to her as a her, as Skye in my imagination, but you know, you think of the protagonist however you want. But I will just from now on refer to the protagonist as the protagonist. Boring, but whatever. So the protagonist is a quadriplegic who astral projects out of his body. And astral projection, if you don't already know, is where you are able to have like an out-of-body experience, so to speak. It's where your consciousness is able to travel outside of your body and into the universe. And so this protagonist astral projects out of his body, but he ends up flying too close to the sun, and he burns off the golden umbilical cord that holds his consciousness and his soul back to the shell of his body back home. And so now he's not able to return back to his body, and he's kind of floating and wandering around the universe, unable to control where he's going, basically. So that brings us to track 2, Divinations. Divination is the attempt to gain knowledge of the future through some kind of ritualistic / occultist means. And so the protagonist's soul is kind of wandering out in the universe, and he ends up getting sucked into this wormhole. And on the other side of this wormhole is the realm of spirit worlds for animals, and these animals find out that this protagonist is not actually dead, he's just wandering around trying to get back to his body, and so they really want to help him get back to the living world. And so they help him get back to the living world, but it's not exactly the right time or place or body. They do successfully get him back into the living world, but it's during a divination by this Russian cult group called the Callisti, and takes place in the early 1900s. And the body that he goes into is actually Grigory Rasputin. So we need to pause here for a quick minute to give you a quick history lesson. I don't know if you know anything about Grigory Rasputin or World War I or the Russian Revolution, but it all has to do with that. So if you've seen the movie Anastasia, yes, it's the creepy guy it's Rasputin who takes off his head, and the Dark of the Night guy, that's him. So this Anastasia is very loosely based on true historical events. So Grigory Rasputin was this mystic, kind of occultist type guy who befriended the Romanov family and Nicholas II, who was the last monarch of Russia before the Russian Revolution. And so he was known to have healing powers, and he ended up befriending the Romanov family because he was able to heal one of their kids from hemophilia. And so he ended up getting really close with the family. He was seen as kind of like a royal advisor, even though historical accuracy has proven that he actually didn't really have much political sway or anything like that. People were mostly just afraid of him, and they kind of perpetuated this legend of Rasputin, most of which isn't really true, but some of it kind of is true. Kind of debatable, I guess. Anyway, so Rasputin was hated and feared, but he was really close with this really powerful family, especially the Tsarina, Nicholas II's wife, Alexandra. She befriended him and really cared for him and always defended him at every turn. Anyway, sorry for the history lesson, but it's kind of important to the story. So then we move on to track 3, which is Quintessence. This is where the soul of the protagonist gets combined with Rasputin and they become one. So Quintessence, if you look it up, has many, many meanings to it. If you just look it up in like Webster's dictionary, means perfect example of something. Second meaning has to do with like medieval Latin, and it means the 5th essence. And so you have earth, wind, fire, water, and then you have like quintessence. 5th essence is thought to be existing in all living things, in all nature, and it's what makes up the celestial bodies, basically. And then it has another meaning in Greek mythology, which means aether or ether, however you pronounce it, and it means the breath of the gods. And then finally, it has one more meaning used today in more modern terms. Physicists have used in quintessence to mean dark energy. So dark energy pervades all of our universe. It's this mysterious thing that we can't really explain. We don't exactly know what it is, but it makes up about 70% of our known universe. Anyway, so that's what quintessence means. It has a lot of layers, just like this album, a lot of layers, a lot of meanings, a lot of interpretations. So quintessence is about the moment that Rasputin and the protagonist's soul become one, and now the protagonist's soul is trapped inside Rasputin. So my idea of what this song means is that Quintessence has taken the meaning of the protagonist's soul being breathed into Rasputin, and I think that the dark energy translation of Quintessence was used in this divination, and the dark energy found the soul wandering, and the dark energy is what was used to combine both of these souls. So now we move on to track 4, the Czar. This track is broken up into 4 different parts. So the Czar, at this time in the early 1900s, the Tsar of Russia is Nicholas II of the Romanov family, like I mentioned, but I think in this song, the Tsar is actually more talking about Rasputin, and if he were to usurp the throne, then he would become the Tsar of Russia. So part 1 is called the Usurper. So though this is not historically accurate, this is the fictionalized version that Mastodon has taken on as part of their story of this album, is that Rasputin is trying to usurp the throne. And so in the beginning of this song, Tsarina Alexandra, the wife of Nicholas II, warns Rasputin and tells him to run away, get away, because she was always really close with Rasputin, always defended him, really best friends with him. If that's my opinion, I've taken it to another level. I think that Rasputin and Alexandra maybe have had like some kind of love thing going on, and Nicholas caught them together, and so this way Rasputin wasn't actually trying to usurp the crown, but actually just trying to usurp his wife, and that's why at the beginning of the album, Tsarina Alexandra warns Rasputin to run away and get away because Nicholas II has found out about them. That brings us to part 2, escape. So this is actual real history, this next part. Rasputin was actually survived multiple assassination attempts. He was first poisoned by cyanide, but that didn't kill him. He was then shot multiple times, and that also didn't kill him. Finally, he was wrapped up in a rug and thrown in the river, and he ended up drowning, which is how he actually died. So that kind of feeds into the legend of Rasputin, how he was some like creepy, evil occultist who cheated death and all this. So that's real. And so this part 2, escape, has to do with the death of Rasputin, and therefore the death of also the protagonist. So I think escape in this sense means not that Rasputin escaped death necessarily, because he did die in the end, but it's about the escape of both his soul and the protagonist's soul escaping out of their bodies and through the crack in the sky and out into the universe. Part 3 is called Martyr, and so this kind of ties into the idea that Rasputin was a mystic, and so he knew about this prophecy of his death through divinations. He knew he would die a horrible and tragic death, but he didn't do anything to escape it necessarily. So does that mean that he knew that this would happen, but he died purposefully so that he could help the protagonist's soul find its way back to his body? So yeah, in this way, Rasputin can maybe be seen, like it's the first time we see that maybe Rasputin is not an evil guy. Maybe he's just a misunderstood dude, and he's actually sacrificed himself in order to save this protagonist's soul and bring him back to his body in the real world during his real time. Then we go on to part 4, which is Spiral. And so this is where the souls of Rasputin and the protagonist, their souls fly out through the crack in the sky. They escape from their bodies after they die, and then they go on out into the universe. Brondahler has also said that crack in the sky to him means that the moment he found out that Skye was dead, it was like the whole sky opened up and the world fell down upon him. So I think this is a really cool juxtaposition of that statement, whereas in this story, it's not the world opening up and falling down and crushing someone, it's the sky opening up to accept 2 souls up into the afterlife. So It's more about the freedom of two souls instead of like the ending of one. The next track is number 5, Ghost of Karelia. Karelia is the northern part of Russia that directly borders Finland. Not sure what it has to do with the story other than the fact that the story takes place in Russia. It's not exactly the right place of where Rasputin died or any of this to do with the story, but that's all I could find. If you know more about what Ghost of Karelia means, please drop that in the comments, because as far as I know, it only means northern part of Russia that directly borders Finland. Anyway, this next part gets really complicated, and it took a lot of research, so get your coffee, get comfortable, strap in, we're about to go on a journey. Track 5, Ghost of Karelia, has to do with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is about the soul's existence and its journey through this period between death and rebirth. Ultimate goal for your soul is to achieve liberation. And so this liberation state is kind of like a nirvana, kind of like a heaven, and you get to escape the cycle of death and rebirth. And so that's kind of what you want to achieve after you die. You don't want to keep being reborn. You want to go into this heaven that is called like your soul's liberation, so to speak. Anyway, so immediately after you die, you go into the first bardo. In the first bardo, you experience the clear light, and so you have an opportunity to accept that death is the ultimate existence. If you accept that death is the ultimate existence, then your soul is liberated, and you've achieved your goal, and now your soul gets to basically be in paradise. Now, if you do not accept that death is the ultimate existence, then then you keep dying and getting reborn, and you get trapped in this cycle type thing, and you move on to the second bardo. Second bardo, which I hope I'm saying that right, I may not be, is where you encounter 7 peaceful deities. And so 7 is really symbolic in this album. There's 7 tracks on the song, there's 7 stages of grief, and there's 7 peaceful deities that you get tested by. So one at a time, you get 7 different opportunities to be tested by these peaceful deities. If you fail all 7 tests, then the next week you move on to 7 wrathful deities. The 7 wrathful deities are just the peaceful deities disguised as wrathful deities. And they test you again, so you get 7 more opportunities to stand before the wrathful deities and be unafraid. If you stand before them and become unafraid, then your soul gets liberated and you get to go to the nirvana, basically. If you are afraid by these 7 wrathful deities 7 different times, then you move on to the third bardo. The third bardo is where you meet the Lord of Death, and the Lord of Death tests you by showing you a mirror, and in this mirror you see all the good and bad deeds you've ever done in your entire life. If your soul realizes that the Lord of the Dead and all these evil minions and things that you're seeing are just a personification of all the evil that you've done in your life, then you get to be liberated. If you are afraid of all of the Lord of Death and all the things that you're seeing in the mirror, then you continue to be trapped in this cycle of death and rebirth, until you finally get liberated. Okay, I'm sorry, that was a lot. In this track, Ghost of Karelia, I believe that Rasputin and the protagonist go through all 3 levels of the bardo, and they go on this journey of discovery and acceptance of their final forms and everything like this. So that brings us to track number 6, Crack the Skye. Opinions kind of differ for the rest of these tracks as to like what they mean and everything like that, so I'm just gonna tell you what my opinion is. My opinion, track 6, Crack the Skye, the protagonist has experienced all these things in the 3 different bardos, and in the third bardo he sees his family mourning over his death, and he sees all the pain and hurt that he's caused by going on this astral projection and risking his death. And so now he kind of has this epiphany that maybe he should never have done that, and he really feels really guilty, and he feels a lot of regret, and so he is determined to now get back to his body before it's too late and his family realizes that his body's there and dead, and they bury him. So then we move on to track number 7, the last track on the album. The protagonist has to completely rely on Rasputin to navigate his way back to his body. And so he's not sure whether or not he can trust Rasputin, because as far as he knows, he's this evil guy. But then again, he's started to discover maybe he's not such a bad guy, maybe he's just a little bit understood. After all, he did save him, and he's the last hope he has in order to finally reach his body and get back to where he was before. And so he has to completely trust Rasputin, and the album kind of leaves off on a cliffhanger, and I think that was done on purpose. So opinions differ on whether or not they think that the protagonist was able to make it back to his body successfully. Either there's 2 different kind of ideas. One is that he made it back to his body and he wakes up and he decides that he will never astral project ever again. Another opinion is that he makes it back to his body and he wakes up, but he's already buried underground because his family found his dead body and they already had a funeral and already accepted his death. In my opinion, I kind of like tragic endings, so in my opinion, I think that he wakes up and he finds he's already buried beneath the ground. He was too late getting back to his body. And so I think that's because this album, again, has a lot to do with dealing with grief, dealing with loss, healing, and acceptance. The final and seventh stage of grief is acceptance, and I think this album is really all about accepting the loss of a loved one. And I think that message to the story is that everything happens for a reason, and I don't think that the protagonist waking up and everything being all fine and happy is necessarily the right message for this album. I think the message is that that everything is as it should be. You know, there's a purpose to the universe, there's a reason, and you can't go back and make everything all perfect again, but you just have to learn to accept the way that things are, accept the loss, and deal with your grief, and really just heal. And so, yeah, that's my opinion on Crack the Skye. Please let me know if you have different opinions. I'm sure some of you probably do. And yeah, there's a lot to be interpreted from this album. It wasn't just totally straightforward where you can just tell the story of what happens or not. It leaves a lot up to your interpretation and a lot up to how you are going to take this album and what it means to you, and kind of come up with your own ideas for it. So please let me know if you have different opinions. That's it for Crack the Skye. I will definitely be doing Leviathan and Blood Mountain at some point, I'm sure. Maybe not super soon, but I will do them. And yeah, a couple of announcements. COHEED and CAMBRIA has just announced their No World for Tomorrow tour, which I'm really excited about. Also, they've said that at the end of this No World for Tomorrow tour, they will have the comics for No World for Tomorrow ready as well, and so we will finally get the real official story of the end of the Amory Wars, which I'm super excited about. In the meantime, if you want to hear my fan theory on No World for Tomorrow, I'll put a link in the description, or I may put a link like somewhere out here or something if I can figure out how to do that. Anyway, yeah, go check that video out. Also, I'm thinking about, I feel like I have a lot of COHEED fans out here on my channel, and I think you all might be interested. Let me know if you are. If you want me to go through and dedicate one whole video to like one track at a time of each COHEED song and explain all the lyrics in it and everything to do with the world, and just go really like super in depth on one song at a time. If you do want me to do that, suggest a song for me to start with down in the comments, and hit subscribe if you want to get notified when I do those videos. Also, I am taking suggestions for other concept albums that you want me to explain. Also drop that in the comments, and hit subscribe if you want to get notified when I do that video. Thanks for watching, guys.